To whom it may concern, on New Year's Eve of December 31st, 1935, while attempting to get on a streetcar in Mobile, Alabama, I was hit by a yellow cab and knocked 25 feet through the air and struck some hard object. It knocked 2 holes in the back of my head and cracked my skull almost totally around, except for about a 4-inch space on my forehead. Remaining unconscious, I was examined by 2 or 3 doctors at the old city hospital through the night, and the next day they had diagnosed that I was dead and ordered my body to be sent to the cooling room, the room for the dead. My father, Jeremiah Ladner, arriving that day from Mississippi, strongly stated he had an inspiration from God that I was not going to be taken by God and would not allow my body to be removed to the cooling room. Several hours later, the doctors detected life, but I remained unconscious for 14 days, awakening on January 14, 1936. And the first thing I saw was Dr. Arundel, the pastor of the old Dauphin Way Baptist Church, standing at the foot of my bed praying to God to return me for my children's sake. On awakening, I knew I had died and gone to heaven and remembered how beautiful the experience was. I also knew that God was not ready for me at that time and had sent me back to earth. At the time, I expressed this heavenly experience to several individuals who were close to me, and have done so several times since. My son, known to the world as Joseph Wesley Newman, adopted name, was born that same year with the last name of Roberts, July 2nd, 1936, remarkably without any brain damage or physical damage whatsoever, as I was 3 months pregnant with him when said above incident occurred. Everyone, including the doctors, had been concerned I would lose the baby, or if it lived it would be badly deformed. I often told him about the same when he was grown up, and that God must have some very special purpose for him, such as a preacher. Disappointing to me, he never seemed to take me serious at all about that subject. I swear before God and man, I totally know all the stated above to be absolutely true. Agnes Marguerite Ladner Davis. Born Agnes Marguerite Ladner, April 19, 1911. Now Marguerite Davis. Sunday, December 10, 1989.
I'm Joseph's friend. I'm his assistant. My name is Jim Jordan. I've been with Joseph now since December of 2007 when I met him here in Fort Worth. During that time, I have seen miracles I have no explanation for, none whatsoever. And I've been agnostic all my life. I'm no longer agnostic. Joseph is a fierce iconoclast, and I'm sure that some people will be frightened by what he has to say. But he's here as a person who is on this world, but he is not of it. He's here to help us. He's here to help us all. And now, here's Joseph.
I hope y'all, in the light of the affidavit my mother had written in a very caring way, just a few years before she died, when God started speaking to me, will show you that there was a miracle that occurred in my life. Isn't it kind of interesting? Steve from Australia had also, just a year ago, had a miracle from God where God spoke to him about my life. You can see what my mother very caringly had done just before she died, and she wanted people to take it seriously, because I never did when I was growing up, exactly as she said. And you'll be amazed about my life, because you'll see that God really raised me. And from the time that I was born, my mother said that she and the doctors thought that my brain would probably be mush and I'd be all broken up. They were expecting that she'd have a miscarriage. She said, "Son, when you came out of the womb, you were screaming so loud." She said that nurses came from other parts of the hospital to hear this baby that was screaming so loud. And she was talking about that my lungs were so powerful, and she said everybody was amazed by it, especially in light of what they had expected. Now, I was in an orphanage home. This was during the Great Depression when I was born, July the 2nd, 1936. Now, as a result of being in an orphanage home, I noticed that well-to-do people didn't give us the time of day. And my brother, who was a year and a half older than me, had really raised me as I grew up. My parents had to work 18 hours a day. This was during the Great Depression. So I only saw them kind of like an aunt or an uncle. I was asleep when they got home. I was asleep when they went to work. I hardly never saw them. I didn't love them because I didn't know them. Now my brother, who was a year and a half older than me, my mother said that when I was born, he said, "That's my baby, that's my baby." And he treated me that way. Now he got in the orphanage home before I did. They wouldn't take you until you were 6 years old. So I had to stay with my grandmother Roberts. And so I had started stealing because I wanted candy and cakes and stuff. And I wanted to carry them to the boys in the orphanage home, what I didn't eat. And I'd never get caught. And when I got in the orphanage home, in fact, the older boys, 12 and 14 years old, would get me to go steal a whole box of cigarettes, and I'd never get caught. I had noticed that women like to be complimented. So I'd tell a cashier how pretty she was. I didn't care if she was overweight or what. I'd walk in and tell her how pretty she was, and they'd pat me on the head and say what a good little boy I was. And I'd just start talking to them about journal things and wait till somebody come in, and then she'd wait on them. And then I'd immediately reach over, pick up a whole box of cigarettes and walk out like I had paid for them. Now I went behind Albright & Wood drugstore in Mobile, Alabama, down on Dolphin Broad Street. And when I went behind the drugstore, there were 12 and 14-year-old boys waiting on me and would brag on me. Now if they even went in the store, because they knew we were in the orphanage home, they'd ask them what were they doing in there, because this was during the Great Depression, and they knew we didn't have money. They never asked me that. I can see that God set me up because my brother used to tell me, God's going to punish you. You can't do those things. Now, I was always thinking from the time I was born, and I thought about it, World War II was going on. I knew people were getting killed, and a lot of people's parents, their fathers or their brothers, and etc., were being killed overseas. And I just thought God was too busy, that he's not going to care if I steal a box of Milky Ways or a box of moon pies or a box of cigarettes. Why should God care about that? These wealthy people wouldn't give us nothing, so I was going to take it. And I didn't feel any guilt about it. I just thought that nobody cared about us, and I'd get it and pass it around to other boys in the home. Now, I didn't even smoke, but the boys would praise me, and so I'd do it. My brother was constantly telling me, God will punish you. And I didn't like him saying it, but I just thought God was too busy, that he wasn't looking at me. Then on D-Day, June the 7th, 1944, now my brother was the only person I loved because he had taken care of me from birth. And he drowned on D-Day, June the 7th, 1944, in the Mobile River. And you'll see a picture here that was taken 2 weeks before he drowned in Mobile Bay. Now, the night before he drowned, the Mobile paper said it was a halo around the moon. The day he drowned, there was a halo around the sun, and it was put in the front page of the Mobile paper that the people in Mobile believed it was signed from God concerning the D-Day invasion. Now, the day he drowned, which is interesting, the Jewish people started being freed in France for the very first time on June the 7th, 1944. Now, I changed like you clicked a light switch from bad to good the day he drowned. In fact, a girl who wrote me up in Life magazine, September 1986, asked me, she said, "You're a very unusual man. Who is it that has such an effect on you?" I said, "Well, it'll shock you." I said, "It's not an adult." I said, "It was a child." And I told her about my brother. And she was so moved that she wrote him up in Life magazine, September 1986. And I knew that God had took him as punishment exactly as my brother had told me. And I changed like you clicked a light switch, and materialistic things have never changed me at all since that time. In fact, I have disdain for them as I've turned down open-ended checks on that energy technology. I've offered my life several times relative to it when I've been threatened. God branded me in the brain literally when I was young. Don't you ever chase a materialistic thing again, and I have not, and my life shows that. That's why it's easy for me to turn down like $200 million and stuff, and I've turned them down several times. Money don't mean spit to me, because I got enough sense to know it don't make you happy, which is like my brother told me. And as I started doing good things, I remember that as I did these good things that he had told me about, he told me I would have a good feeling, which didn't make any sense to me. But after I started doing good things for people and asking no money for it, like carrying groceries for old people, putting it in their car and taking no money, when I'd start home in the afternoon, then I noticed I'd have this good feeling come over me that really shocked me, because I never thought you could feel something like that. And it made me miss my brother, and I cried for him for 2 years, and I used to lay on my stomach and cry 2 years after he had drowned. Now, to show you how I grew up, though, during that depression, and God molded me and made me, was that when I was just 8 years old, my mother, the day my brother drowned, took me out of the orphanage home. And she was working at Brooklyn Air Force Base. As you saw that picture, she had won Miss Brooklyn Air Force Base 7 years after she had had that miracle, concerning her death and my birth. She was the secretary and the receptionist for the Journal of Brooklyn Air Force Base. And she had won Miss Brooklyn Air Force Base. And you could tell she was a very pretty woman. But I wasn't close to her. I was just close to my brother. Now, she was trying to get close to me, but I didn't feel anything. And anyway, she let me go to my grandmother's, Ladner's, in Poplarville, Mississippi. And so when I was 8 years old, I'd take a city bus and go down to the Greyhound station in Mobile, Alabama at 8 years of age, and get on a Greyhound bus and go to Gulfport, Mississippi, change buses, and take a bus called the White Eagle that would get into Poplarville, Mississippi at 2 o'clock in the morning, dragging a big suitcase, going to my grandmother's and granddaddy's house. And my grandmother would always be waiting on me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, that's the way I grew up. I ran through life. Now, my mother got remarried when I was 10 years of age, and they bought 300 acres of property out close to the Mississippi-Alabama line. And they started going out there on the weekends to show you how God molded me. I faced a jaguar when I was 10 years of age, and I didn't have any fear. Now, most of you people don't even know what a jaguar is, but I can still call them. And they would answer me as a boy. And I can still call them up. But there were jaguars at our house, and we was out there one weekend, just on the weekend, and I heard a noise, and I was sleeping on the floor, and I went to the front porch, and my dog had her tail between her legs, and I was asking her what was wrong, and then I heard this cat growl up under a big fig tree right out in front of me. And it was funny, in fact. I didn't have any fear. I remember shaking my finger at the cat because I couldn't see it. But I shook my finger at it, and I said, "You wait right there. I'm going to get my gun, and I'm going to come back and kill you." And I went inside, and I just had a single shot, 22. But I was a dead shot, and I already knew that if I shot something through the eyeball, that it'd go into its brain. And I was a dead shot. I could shoot from my hip and hit what I was aiming at. And I learned that early. They used to dumbfound grown men. But my mother heard me, and she walked out on the porch with me. When she heard that big cat, it scared her to death. And she allowed me to bring the dog into the house because I told her I wasn't going in, that I was going to kill that cat. He's not going to kill my dog. And she had me come inside and with the dog, and I laid there almost all the night, dozing off and waking up to see if that cat would come on the porch, and I was going to shoot through the glass panes and kill it. Now, I didn't have any fear at all, and I know that God gave it to me. All of this is not an accident, what I'm telling you. And I grew up with jaguars out in the Mississippi-Alabama line. And I don't care whether you believe that or not, but just like there were boys when I was 17 years old went out there with me and hurt them and scared them to death. Now my stepfather, who was a tyrant to me, was scared to death of it. He had gone out there one weekend they had gone out without me, and I stayed because I had some things I was going to do with a friend of mine in Mobile. So I stayed in Mobile, and that cat scared the stew out of my stepfather, who was a tyrant to me. He went out to the car to get the paper, and when he slammed the door, these two cats were laying right behind the fence, not more than 10 feet from him, and they both growled with a high roar. And he took off running and run back in the house and said, screaming, they're out there, they're out there. And after that, and in fact, my mother said, what are you talking about? And he said, those cats are out there. And he was petrified of them, which shocked her. He went and got 3 locks the next day, put a lock at the top of the door, one in the middle of the door, and one on the bottom of the door, on all doors, so he could lock them. He was so scared of those cats. And I'm sure that God had them. So after that, I had a great affection for those cats because I didn't like my stepfather. He was a tyrant to me. When we moved out in the country, he made me work from sun up to sundown 7 days a week. I got paid 25 cents a week. When I was, I was really a man by the time I was 12 years old because of the way I grew up. And he swung at me one day with his fist because we lived so far back in the woods. We lived 3 miles down a dirt road. Now, whenever it would rain, the bus would not come down that road at all. And so I'd have to walk 3 miles down a muddy dirt road and then hitchhike to school and then hitchhike back and then walk back down that muddy road. So I was scraping mud off, and it was cold, and I was scraping mud off my shoes onto a piece of paper. And my stepfather told me to go outside and do it. Now I'm having to walk outside barefooted with these shoes. And it was an old house, and I wasn't getting them on the floor. I was putting it on a newspaper. But anyway, it made me angry. So I went out there and started beating it on the side of the house to knock the mud off. And he said, boy, you better quit that. I'm going to come out there and knock some sense in you. And I said, yeah, that'll be the day. Well, he come running out there and swung at me with his fist. Now, he swung so hard that he went all the way around and was hanging off the porch. Now, I ducked and did a flip off the porch. He didn't even touch me. And I was standing on the ground and had picked up a piece of wood. And it's like I had done it 1,000 times. I knew I could split his skull. And I watched him just like a cat watches something. And I was thinking how slow he was as he turned back around. Now, when he turned back around, God's voice came out of me. Now, just like he had ran inside, as my mother told me, with those cats, because God spoke to him and said he was going to kill him. He turned as white as a piece of paper and took off running in that house faster than he had ran out, and was locking all the locks on that inside of that door, the top, the middle, and the bottom. And my mother was hollering at him, what's going on? Now, he was hollering, that boy's going crazy. But I knew he was scared to death of me. I left home that day, and I ended up going to Amet, Louisiana, roughnecking on a well rig. I'm just telling you this so you know that God raised me. Ain't no man who's raised me, ain't no woman who's raised me. God has raised me. I was a man time I was 14 years old. I was a man time I was 12 years old. I faced a jaguar when I was 10 years old, and I didn't have any fear of it. I still have affection for jaguars to this very day. I wouldn't shoot one. I saw one when I was grown, in that same land, but I wouldn't shoot it. I just put my light on it, but I wouldn't shoot it because they were part of my growing up, and they put steel inside of me. But anyway, I left home and started roughnecking on a well rig. I got this finger right here crushed, lifting a 125-pound pollen block all day long when I was 14 years of age. And the war was going on then. Korean War had just started, and I had to go to Louisiana to get it fixed, and it was just hanging by a piece of skin. The doctor said if I'd take some pain, they could learn a lot from me, and I'd help a lot of boys in the war. And so I knew I'd be going to war as soon as I was 18. So I I said, yes, I'll be glad to take the pain. And I did, and he saved his finger. And I show you how little that I loved my mother, so that you'll know I didn't pay any attention to her, based on the letter, that affidavit that she had written before she died. She was very sincere about it. She came to see me when I was in the hospital there. Now, I blamed her for what she had married this guy who was such a tyrant to me. In fact, the only compliment he ever paid me was after I left home, and he told her I did the work of 4 black men. Now, that's because black people always did the work that white men didn't want to do. It was really a compliment to the black people as well as to myself. But he never praised me for anything except he hated to pay money. That's why he paid me 25 cents a week. It's what I got paid. But it molded me and put steel inside of me that I could face the power brokers of the world that I've had to face. God had a purpose from my birth, as my mother said, and that this is all coming together for God. I've always said I'm just a hunk of meat, but the information God has given me is for every person on this earth. And as I grew on up, and then I went to Puerto Rico. I joined the service as soon as I was 18. But my mother came to see me at the hospital. I meant to tell you, I would not see her because I blamed her so much. And even a nurse came up to me and she said, "Joseph, you're a real nice person, and why won't you see your mother? She's down there crying desperately to see you." And I told her, I said, "Look, you're a nice person, but I'm telling you, don't push this, or I'll get up and walk out of here. I'm not going to see her." And I blamed her for the trouble that I had. And I apologized to her once I got grown, because I realized when God started speaking to me, as I'll explain to you, that God used her to mold me, to turn me into steel, to get me prepared as a warrior for the fight that I was going to have to fight for humanity. I realized that once I got grown, but when you're a kid in the middle of it, and you don't know that, you hold other people who are responsible for what's happening to you. And I held her responsible, and it hurt her very much, which I was sorry for once I was grown, but I wasn't sorry for it when I was young. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I'm going to tell you some other material that's very pertinent that you will find exciting once you hear this. Now, I left and went to Puerto Rico, and I quit believing in God, as you saw on that at the beginning of this film. That I had quit believing in God because I saw such a disparity between wealth and poverty. I made a vow standing on that mountain. If I'm the only entity in the universe that's going to do good for humanity, I was going to do it. And I spoke to the goodness of the universe, that you're my essence, you're my being. Give me the wisdom and give me the knowledge. Before I can die, I can change all this disparity between wealth and poverty all over this earth, and this is what I want. Give it to me. I'm sure God looked down at me, and he probably smiled and said, "This young little tiger I got in front of me here is turning out the way I want him to, and I'm going to give him what he wants." And he gave it to me in spades, because I have had one hellacious fight, climbed a mountain to fight for humanity of what I wanted to do.